So we have a Gouda Gouda event rerun going on the JP version of the game, and that is bringing back the insane offensive support Himiko, who I actually think I kind of downplayed when she first came out. I kind of looked at her initially and I was like, okay, she's like a pretty good buster crit support ruler. I guess she's kind of fine, but then using her over the past few months and for some specific challenge quests, she's actually really good. So much so that even though I'm not the biggest fan of Himiko, I might be summoning for her when she comes out over on the NA version of the game. She's really borderlining on that must summon material, and you guys will understand by the end of the video why she's so good. But if you enjoy FGO content, I upload these videos every single day. So what are you doing? Give your boy that like and that subscribe. He's on the journey to 100k. And if you want some bonus content, well, channel members are going to be getting bonus content soon. You kind of have to wait for the challenge quest to open up for some of these events, but when they do come out, you know, channel members will be the first to see them and maybe the only people to see them. So if you just want that little bit of extra content in your life and you want to do something to support the channel, click that join button to become a channel member. But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into Himiko, starting off with her hits, which just as kind of like a funny note, she's a buster crit ruler that also makes everybody else have like really high buster crit damage, but I find it really funny that she only has one hit on each of her buster cards. It really doesn't matter. Buster cards, the hits are probably the cards that matter the least unless you're really doing massive star genning with it, or you're a really odd servant like Summer Nobu or Skahawk, where you can actually refund NP because your hits on your buster cards are so high. Unless you're like a very odd situation like that, it typically doesn't matter. But again, I just find it funny that they were like, yeah, one hit on the buster card since it doesn't matter. And she's a buster crit ruler, but you know, whatever. She's also packing 3 hits on both of her arts cards with 0.57% NP generation, which means you'll be getting some pretty average NP gain if you're just using these cards normally. But if you're able to crit, because that NP charge is kind of bordering on 0.60%, it's getting really close to that with 3 hits. You can actually refund a decent bit with a crit. So definitely be aiming for those on your arts cards to be snagging those up when you can. But if you're not able to do that, Himiko does have something in the back pocket to really ensure that she's able to gen her NP immediately. And then finally, she actually has a pretty decent quick card with 4 hits on it and 9.9% star gen. This is because, again, she is a buster crit support type servant, so they want her to have every ability possible to gen some stars. She is also packing that lovely 5-hit extra attack, which if you don't know is a composite card that gens stars, NP, and does big boy damage. And having the 5 hits is really that sweet spot to really just make those Brave Chains hit different. And who knows, you might actually be doing Brave Chains with Himiko because she can actually hit like an absolute dump truck. But with that being said, let's talk about the skills and why this servant is so good. So first and foremost, there's her charisma, which I actually really like this charisma because it's giving the entire party a 20% attack buff, and then it gives everybody an 8 critical star regeneration buff for 3 turns, which means you're actually refunding 24 stars every single turn because this procs on everybody in the party. So she's giving extra damage to everybody and basically guaranteeing that you'll have plenty of stars to play around with because this is just the passive stars you gen every single turn. This doesn't take into account, you know, any stars you might drop on your NP. If you have a servant that actually has pretty decent star gen, or they themselves also has a star regeneration buff, or they have something like an instinct to compound with this skill, it's just a very, very solid base to work with for any team comp. And then especially when you start considering people like Merlin that you could pair with Himiko, who then gives you extra stars, extra HP refund, extra NP refund, it makes for an absolute killer combination. And this is just her first skill. Her second skill is a little unfortunate. It's not bad, but I don't like that they tied the survivability in with the damage steroid. And the reason I say it's a damage steroid is because she's getting a 30% buster buff for 3 turns, but then a 50% buff against demonic enemies for 3 turns, and then also gaining 1 turn of invincibility on a 6-turn cooldown. Granted, it's not as bad as someone like, say, Raiko or Jack's mana burst, where it's a 1-turn mana burst tied with a 1-turn evasion, but you can still be put in a little annoying situations where you want to slam the enemy really hard, but you're going to waste that invincibility that you might want for later. But thankfully, she is a buster servant, so you can pair her with somebody like Merlin, who has the AoE nope skill. And if you really want to get crazy with things, you can pair her with double Merlin and then just have her go absolute ham Tara with the crits. So not the absolute worst. Like, there are people you could pair her with. Again, Merlin does make an excellent partner for Himiko because he helps her out in like the rare situations where you might find a little bit of annoyance in wasting the invincibility. He can kind of help her out with that, give her some extra survivability with the healing and whatnot. But then, I mean, this is just a very solid offensive buff if you're looking at it for that reason. You've got like two schools of thought when it comes to like the different types of buffs that a servant will get offensively. They'll either have the big Chungus 50% chatty buff for 1 turn, or they'll have like the 30 or 35% for 3 turns. And generally, I prefer having the 3-turn buff because it means while you're getting a little bit less damage, overall you're getting more because it's spread out over 3 turns. And then having a niche against demonic enemies isn't bad. There are a decent number of servants and a pretty decent amount of enemy mobs that are in that category, so a nice niche for her to have. And then finally we have her 3rd skill, which is that big, thicky 50% battery that I was talking about, where I was saying she has something in the back pocket for her NP generation. This is what I was talking about. But then not only that, it's going to increase the star weight of her buster cards for 1 turn, and then she's going to be getting 100% buster crit damage for 1 turn as well. Again, very good pairing with Merlin, because Merlin also really specializes in doing 1 turn of really big boy damage with his 3rd skill. If you don't know, the 3rd skill does give a 50% buster buff for 3 turns, but it does also give the 100% crit damage buff for 1 turn as well, so you can actually, with double Merlin, give her like 300% crit damage and just have her obliterate whoever is in her path. Now you might be asking, she has that 50% battery, but what does the NP do? Is it some really big chatty offensive NP? Or is it a godly support NP? Like, what is it gonna be? Her skills are already so good, and I mean, they honestly help her do a lot of damage, but what does the NP do? Well, it's something that you actually really want to get to, because it's a really basic NP, but it is so ungodly broken. So first and foremost, depending on her NP level, she's going to be raising the party's buster performance, yes, the entire party's buster performance, anywhere from 30 to 50% for 3 turns. So there actually is an incentive to go for higher NP copies of Himiko. God forbid you have an NP5 Himiko. That is a buster mana burst that lasts for 3 turns. And we were just talking about how really traditionally it's like you only get the mana burst for 1 turn, or in some rare cases, maybe 3 attacks for 3 turns. But DW's like, all right, look, if you're gonna wail a little bit, you're gonna put a little money into Himiko, we'll give you access to just a free 3-turn buster mana burst for the entire party, which, again, there's also some team comps that we'll talk about in a little bit, but there's a little white-haired saber face that really likes this buff that is very, very good in a team comp with Himiko. Then she gives the entire party 2 stages of overcharge that unfortunately only last for 1 time. But again, I've been talking about Merlin the entire time, and if you guys know, Merlin's overcharge is that he gives extra stars depending on his NP overcharge level. So that makes Himiko really good when it comes to NP chains, or just popping her NP and then popping another NP next turn. Like, it just makes her really good for that. And then her own overcharge is increasing the party's critical attack damage by 50% to 100% for 3 turns. And obviously the next NP you get with Himiko, that's going to be a guaranteed 75% crit damage for the entire party. You guys can probably guess if this gets really disgusting really fast. And who is that white-haired saber I was talking about that also really likes to give buffs to overcharge and also really loves getting the extra buster buff and the extra crit damage buff? Well, it's none other than Morgan, because do you guys know what Morgan does on her NP? She also gives 1 stage of overcharge to the entire party. So you can just wombo combo these 2 together, because Morgan's overcharge isn't really the best. That's kind of like one of her weak points. But for this team comp in particular, it makes her a really good lead, because then you can guarantee that Himiko is going to be starting at overcharge 3, because not only would Himiko be the 2nd NP in a chain, but she'd also have that 1 stage of overcharge buff from Morgan, meaning she starts at overcharge level 3, 75% crit damage for the entire party. And then you just have someone like Merlin kind of hanging around being the glue for the team with the AoE invincibility skill, the passive HP and NP regeneration, and you're pretty much set after that. Like, you really shouldn't be in the fight for all that long of a time. You should pretty much obliterate whoever's in your face at that point. Like, once Himiko starts getting her NP off, it's kind of a wrap for everybody involved. There's also some stall team comps that you could do where it's like Castoria, Merlin, and Himiko, where you basically just cannot die and Himiko is just free to slam dunk on the enemy party. So yeah, that's kind of why she's regarded as a must summon type servant. She is an insane support type servant for the Buster meta. And by the way, she's a ruler, which we all thought was kind of a demerit for her at first because we were like, oh, a ruler? She's not really hitting anybody for any super effective damage aside from poor BB over there who just keeps getting beat up. But it actually makes her really good because for those stall teams I was talking about where you just try to keep everybody alive and just have them continually buff Himiko, it means she's actually really hard to drop because the ruler class makes her really, really tanky, and she's got an actual metric dumpy amount of HP. We're talking 15k HP pre-grailing, and as a nice side bonus, she's immune to poison and curse debuffs, like completely. She has debuff immunity, not like a little chance or anything, not 50% chance to whiff it, just completely immune. So you can't even like chip away at her HP or anything unless you have burn or something. Which, I mean, let's be honest, who's really pulling out the burn in today's meta? I say that, and then probably the next big boss in like Lost Belt 7 is going to be super high burn enemy or something, right? I'm probably jinxing it. But you guys get what I'm saying. She's very, very thick, very tanky, really hard to put down, and outputs a lot of damage, right? She's a very, very high DPS servant that then makes everybody else just hit ooga booga levels of damage, right? So when I say that Himiko is borderline a must summon servant, I definitely mean it. Like, she's definitely worth the hype. And that's definitely one of the benefits of us being on the NA version of the game, because initially, alongside myself, a lot of the Japanese players, we didn't really think Himiko was all that broken. Like, we thought she was good, but we had no idea she was going to be this good. We started getting more combo pieces for her, then especially Morgan comes out, and it just makes her look even better. So us as NA players, we're like, oh yeah, definitely, this is going to be a servant that a lot of people should summon for. And in fact, you see this a lot, actually. For instance, when Space Ishtar initially came out, we all thought she was a little mid because she was kind of having a hard time in the quick looping meta, but then Castoria came out and turned Space Ishtar into quite literally the arts looping goddess. Like, she's actually just the Dantes of the arts meta. So going forward, it's kind of why I'm a little more skeptical on servants sometimes. Like, I see Jacques over there who I just covered. I'm like, okay, he seems pretty solid, but I'm a little bit wary if they're going to make him like super broken, or I guess make her super broken with one of the next coming up support type servants. So I don't know, just a little bit of a life lesson for FGO and rating servants going forward. But with that being said, leave your thoughts on her in the comments down below. And with that being said, you guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.